Hello friends, my name is Nick and this week's plant of the week is Rhipsalis pilocarpa, commonly referred to as the hairy-stemmed cactus, and a couple other names that are very similar to that. But a more universal name for this type of houseplant is a jungle cactus. So Rhipsalis across the board, as well as some of its close relatives, are known as jungle cacti because, as the name suggests, they are members of the Cactaceae family, therefore considered cacti, and their natural habitat is the rainforest. This one in particular, I'm pretty sure, is native to like southern Brazil in the rainforest, and as you may imagine from this growing in the rainforest, the care is quite different from many of the other plants that we are more familiar with as cacti. So first and foremost, the light for this houseplant. As this does grow in the jungle, this is an epiphytic cactus, so it's growing on like trees in the rainforest. So as you can imagine, it has a heavy cover of canopy above it that's blocking out some of the sunlight. So this is not a houseplant that you have to grow in a window. A north-facing window is fine, but if you're working with like an east or south or west-facing window, I would recommend pulling your plant back quite a bit from the window, as it just does not require a high amount of sunlight. You can see pretty visually that these stems, I want to call them, I don't think they're leaves, they are very skinny, therefore they really don't need a lot of sunlight in order to grow to its fullest potential. So I have mine growing like 10 feet away from my east-facing windows. Granted, I do get a really good amount of light from those east-facing windows, so it's been doing very well, and you can see all of the new growth that it's putting off, which it puts off new growth in a very interesting manner. I find that they will put off these like long runner stems, and then at the end they will just like push off a bunch of new growth, which can make for a really interesting hanging specimen over time. So as you can see, I have this just sitting on this little riser right here. You could imagine this is a plant that you probably wouldn't want to have just sitting on a table. You really would want to have this hanging up, or I have mine up on a shelf on the wall where it can really show off its nice foliage on the white wall that lives behind it. These lighting requirements, I think, are just such an excellent trait for Rhipsalis to possess. Most succulents and cacti require a lot of sunlight in order to grow to their fullest potential. They require a south-facing window or a west-facing window, so the fact that this doesn't even have to grow inside a window and is a cactus is amazing, and it lets you kind of branch out a little bit if you're more into growing foliage houseplants. You like those more like tropical jungly houseplants, because while this is a cactus, it still completely fits that vibe. So I think it's a great way for anybody who's more of a cactus or succulent grower to get their toes wet with houseplants and vice versa. And just before I get too ahead of myself, I want to give you a little shopping tip with Rhipsalis. But you're probably going to find these in your succulent and cacti selection at your local houseplant stores. And you're also probably going to find these available in like hanging baskets that they're just like enveloping the planter that they're in. Those ones are usually, in most cases, maybe the price has changed. It's been a while since I've been in the industry, but those would always cost a lot more than the smaller ones. The 6-inch hanging baskets would often go for like $50 to $100 depending on the variety and also how full the plant is, just because those wholesale prices are astronomical in comparison to the ones that you're going to find in 4-inch pots, which is how I found this one. And this was just amongst the assortment of cacti and succulents, which are usually all the same price if they're ordered as just an assortment, which that's how most of the plant shops are ordering them as. So if you scour your succulent and cacti selection in just the small like 4 or 2-inch planters, you're probably going to find a couple of Rhipsalis, and they're going to be dirt cheap in comparison to the larger hanging baskets. And of course, that's subjective. The price might be different where you're shopping or depending on where you live. But just one thing to keep in mind, if you are looking for Rhipsalis, but you keep finding ones that are just out of your price range, peek closely at the assortments in your succulent selection. You might be surprised what you find, and you'll probably find a couple different varieties, this one included as one of the most common ones that you will probably find. So moving on to the water, while these are cacti and they are drought-tolerant houseplants, as you can imagine, these growing in the rainforest, they are getting watered quite often. Also, these leaves are pretty thin, so while they do store moisture, they don't store like a ton of moisture. So if you are not watering these enough, you will definitely find them shrivel up, and while they will recover, they might take a couple days to recover as they fill back out. I am a little too lackadaisical with watering my Rhipsalis. I know that for a fact, just because I know that these require a watering like I'd say like every 4 to 7 days, like at least once a week, you probably want to give your Rhipsalis a watering. I think I'm probably erring more on like every 10 to 14 days. And I'm sure if I was giving this a little bit more water, it might be a little bit more thick and growing a little bit more robust. But on the other end of the spectrum, I think they handle drought fantastically. This variety in particular with the thicker leaves, some of the ones with the thinner foliage, like some of those are just like spaghetti thin, they might not handle the drought as well. But the pilocarpa and some of the thicker varieties like my elliptica definitely handles the drought without a problem. Like I said, it would just be best for me to water this a little bit more often. I'm sure it would appreciate that, but just because it's a cactus doesn't mean it needs to be watered sparingly, but if you do water it too much, just like any other cactus, this will rot. So you do need to find a happy medium. But having a good soil, the next thing we'll talk about, is also very important. So as this is an epiphytic houseplant, meaning that this does not necessarily grow in soil, it grows attached to another plant, and it's not like a parasite, it's not sucking off the nutrients from that plant, but it's just living like in tandem on a larger tree, a host plant. So this is not going to love a very heavy soil mixture. So even just like a standard cactus and succulent mixture might be a little too heavy for these. So I would just recommend adding some perlite or some orchid bark. Bark particularly because you can imagine if this is growing on a tree, I'm thinking the roots are probably going to be working with some bark here and there, but perlite is an excellent option too. It's very inexpensive and it's something you'll find at any gardening center, houseplant store, probably even hardware stores, and it's just this the little white pebbly stuff that you see in the soil here, little like lava rocks that will allow your soil to drain better, be more well aerated and looser, which is what your Rhipsalis is going to thrive on. So definitely be sure to choose a nice loose potting mixture, trying to recreate what this houseplant would be receiving if it were growing in its natural habitat. So the temperature for this houseplant, I wouldn't really worry about it. I know this is going to thrive in like 65 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit, but I wouldn't worry too much about it being too hot or too cold. I haven't had really issues with my Rhipsalis, but if you want to be the very best plant parent, 65 to 75 degrees. And also the humidity, like you literally don't have to worry about it at all. These will handle the low humidity of your house totally fine. Of course, these grow in the jungle and they're subject to higher humidities, but I have not seen any problems whatsoever from even like the driest months here in my home without a humidifier. So don't worry about humidity, you're totally fine. Toxicity, you will see kind of mixed things online, I believe, but if I'm not mistaken, these are non-toxic to pets. So you don't have to worry about that, even though, like I said, you might see some mixed reviews online about that. I'm gonna state it. They're non-toxic. You're totally fine. You don't have to worry about it. Rhipsalis are pretty light feeders. You can be pretty lackadaisical about fertilizing them. If it's in fresh soil, you don't have to fertilize it at all. I always wait till I've had a plant in the same soil for a full growing season because at that point the soil is probably depleted of nutrients. Otherwise, it probably is fine and full of nourishment for your plants. But once you get beyond that first growing season, then you can go ahead and fertilize your plants with your Rhipsalis. You can use a standard cactus fertilizer and just dilute it in half, as you always want to dilute your fertilizers in half when you are working with indoor house plants. And for propagating these, it's pretty simple. You just need to take a cutting anywhere in the plant, stick it in water or soil. I would recommend doing water though. You'll see along the stems there are a bunch of little rootlets that are sticking out because in this natural habitat, as this plant gets too long or damaged, or if it breaks off, like if this whole chunk fell off onto the ground or lower part of the host tree or whatever soil medium it's working with, it wants to survive. So it's going to try to root up into that soil. So very, very easy plants to propagate. If you ever knock a piece off, you can basically just put it back in the base of your planter and it'll probably regrow itself very easily. These will also produce little flowers and red berries on the foliage. I'm pretty sure that's much more prevalent on the plant when it's like the fall and winter months, not really something you're going to see during the growing season, at least in my own experience. But it's just really nice seeing the little flowers and berries, which they're not the most showy flowers or berries, but just little things on this plain green sticky foliage. I just think really changes the vibe and just gives you a little bit more to enjoy with this houseplant. But thank you guys so much for joining me today. I think that's all the information I have to share on Rhipsalis pilocarpa, the hairy-stemmed cactus, or a jungle cactus more universally. Thank you guys so much for joining me. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at phillyfoliage. You can subscribe to my Patreon for even more houseplant content. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I will see you guys in my next video. Have a great time.